Meaning of education. Education has a wide connotation. It promotes the harmonious development of the child. The design process of education carries different meanings. There are various definitions of the term education. Different thinkers, philosophers, psychologists, educationists, and teachers express their own views according to their outlook on education. The term education is said to be derived from the Latin word educare. Educare means to bring up, to train, to nourish. According to another view, education means leading out the inborn qualities, talents, powers, and virtues of the child, because the words e means out of and duco means I lead. So the natural endowment with which an individual comes to the world should be developed. The creative power should be expressed, and impulses, urges, and needs should be satisfied. According to this view, development of individuality has got some importance, that is mainly the individual latent abilities, interests, and aptitudes. This view emphasizes the all-round drawing out of the best in the child and less on the development of social efficiency for better adjustment in a society. Education has a great importance in all-round development of the child. The importance of education has always been realized by all people at all times. Various educational theorists have tried to define it according to their own philosophy of life. According to Rig Veda, education makes a man self-reliant and selfless. The Upanishads expresses that education's end product is salvation. Education is a source of illumination, leading us correctly in the various spheres of life. Philosophical outlook of different teachers opined that knowledge is the third eye of man, which gives him an insight into all affairs, teaching him how to act. An uneducated person is like an animal without tail and horns. Education is a controlling grace to the young, consolation to the old, wealth to the poor, and an ornament to the rich. In real sense, education is a realm of learning, a process of experience. Through education and the various experiences we gather knowledge and skills, as well as develop our attitudes, values towards our life. These in turn mold our behavior and help us adjust in the present day society. Narrow meaning of education. In a narrow sense, education means schooling or formal instruction which is imparted within the four walls of the school. It starts when the child enters in the institution of education and ends when the child completes his studies or leaves the educational institution. In this sense, a man is said to be educated if he passes examination and receives some degrees and diplomas from school, college, or university. In the narrow sense, education is deliberate, purposeful, and planned effort on the part of the teacher to impart some amount of knowledge with the help of a definite curriculum. This type of education is imparted by teachers to students. S.S. Mackenzie, the famous educational thinker, remarked that in narrow sense, it may be taken to mean any conscious, directed effort to develop and cultivate powers. Thus, the narrow meaning of education basically implies that it is just a formal type of education, time-bound, fixed curriculum-based, teachers-centered. Broad or wider meaning of education. In the broader sense, education is called a continuous process. It begins at birth and continues throughout life. Education is a process of development from infancy to maturity, from cradle to grave. Broader meaning of education has been defined by different thinkers from different points of view. According to Drever, education is a process of controlling and modifying the behavior of the young so as to produce a recognized type of behavior in the adult. On the other hand, Hopkins opines that education in its widest sense includes everything exerts a formative influence. Similarly, Edward Thring elaborated his idea and said that education is a transmission of life by the living to the living. In this sense, the famous American pragmatic philosopher John Dewey expressed that life itself is development and development itself is life. Education covers the entire life of the child. It includes all the influences which act upon an individual during his passage from the cradle to the grave. Education is everything which influences human behavior and personality. This kind of experiences comes through a number of agencies like family, school, society, etc. The wider meaning of education basically implies that it is a lifelong process of learning. It covers all the experiences of life. There is no fixed curriculum and methods. It is free from rigidity. It is a process of adjustment. Definitions of education. To make things more clear, we have to go through the definitions of education provided by various educationists, thinkers, and philosophers in different ways. Each of them has expressed his or her own view regarding education. We can mention some of these definitions here to give a comprehensive idea of the term education. The Webster New 20th Century Dictionary defines the meaning of education as a process of training and developing knowledge, skill, mind, and character, etc., especially by formal schooling. According to Plato, education is the capacity to feel pleasure and pain at the right moment. It develops in the body and in the soul of the pupil all the beauty and all the perfection of which he is capable of. Aristotle, the renowned disciple of Plato, defined education as one that develops man's faculty, especially his mind, so that he may be able to enjoy the contemplation of supreme truth, goodness, and beauty, in which perfect happiness essentially consists. He briefly stated that education is the creation of a sound mind in a sound body. John Adams, a modern English educationist, defines education as a conscious and deliberate process in which one personality acts upon another in order to modify the development of that other by the communication and manipulation of knowledge. According to John Dewey, the famous American educationist, education is the process of living through a continuous reconstruction of experiences. It is the development of capacities in the individual which will enable him to control his environment and fulfill his possibilities. Another famous educational philosopher, T.P. Nunn, said, "Education is the complete development of individuality so that he makes an original contribution to human life according to the best of his capacity." According to Thomson Godfrey, education is the influence of the environment on the individual with a view to producing a permanent change in the habits of behavior, of thought, and of attitude. According to Raymond, education is a process of development from infancy to maturity, the process by which he adapts himself gradually in various ways to his physical, social, and spiritual environment. Regarding education, Mahatma Gandhi said, "By education, I mean an all-round drawing out of the best in child and man, body, mind, and spirit." According to Swami Vivekananda, education is the manifestation of the perfection already in man. We have discussed many definitions regarding the term education, but in our present practice, Redden's definition is more practicable and by far the best. According to him, education is the deliberate and systematic influence exerted by a mature person upon the immature through instruction, discipline, and harmonious development of physical, intellectual, aesthetic, social, and spiritual powers of the human being, according to the individual and social needs, and directed towards the union of the educand with the educator as the final end. Nature of education. Although in the broad sense education is a lifelong and continuous process, yet for convenience to understand the term, the educationists have divided education into three processes which are briefly discussed below. Bipolar process of education. Education is a two-way process. Sir John Adams has described the process of education as a bipolar process. Here the personality of the teacher influences the students in all aspects. The teacher and the student being the two poles, the resultant process of their cooperative effort in education. Teachers impart education and students acquire education. Without teachers, students cannot learn anything. On the other hand, if there are no students in the classroom, whom would the teachers teach? Bipolar process of education is not only conscious but also a deliberate one. Tripolar process of education. Today, education is a three-way process. Education involves an interaction among the educants, students, the educator, and the social environment. The teacher tries to develop the personality of the students in the light of the needs of the society. Here both the teacher and the taught make efforts for achieving the purpose or destination in a conducive environment. Education is a dynamic process. Education is a dynamic process and it helps the individual in their progress. Education reconstructs a new and better social pattern according to changing needs of time, place, and society. Education, in a sense, is related to time, place, and social change. The process of education helps the individual in their development as well as in the development of the society. Types of education. After developing a fair understanding of the basic meaning and concept of education, let us discuss the different types of education. The process of education can generally be divided into three types as shown below. Types of education. Formal education. Formal education is planned by men consciously and deliberately. It is modification of behavior through an organized system of education which is specifically established for the purpose. Formal education has a particular goal. Here students and teachers are engaged for a definite purpose. The purpose or objective for formal education is predetermined. There are some rules, regulations, and formalities. Formal education is imparted in the educational institutions like schools, colleges, and universities. After the completion of the course with the help of examination and evaluation, the concerned authority confers a degree and certificate to the individual. It should be pointed out that formal education is not merely confined to classroom activities, but it also includes those activities outside the classroom which are consciously and deliberately planned. To prove it more clear, let us discuss its basic features in a precise way. It has a predetermined goal. Teachers play central role. It has fixed curriculum. It is time-bound. It is exam-oriented. After completion of this type of education, the learner gets a degree, diploma, and certificate. Informal education. After getting an idea about the formal education, it is essential that we know about the informal type of education. Our life is full of activities. All these activities teach us something. For example, when a child touches the fire, he gets burned. From this, he learns not to touch the burning fire. This is called the education of life, which one gets through the informal experiences. Informal education is incidental education, and it has no predetermined plan. Informal education is that type of education which we get by living with others in the society. Informal education takes place both consciously and unconsciously. It has no systematic procedure. It is casual and gained through daily experiences, activity, and work. This type of education is not confined to a place and a fixed time schedule. Informal education starts from birth and goes on till death. Informal education is not imparted by any specialized agencies established for the purpose. Neither the student nor the teacher is conscious of the process. There is no prescribed course for learning, no fixed timetable, and no formal ways of education. To be more precise, the main features of non-formal education are: it is not pre-planned, it is incidental, it is a lifelong process, there is no fixed curriculum, no specific method of teaching, there is no examination, no certificate, degree and diploma. Difference between formal and informal education. After getting a better understanding about formal and informal education, we should also know how both the types can be differentiated. There are some differences between formal education and informal education. They are as follows. Formal education has formal means and ends, but on the other hand, informal education has no such means and ends. Informal education, there are qualified teachers to teach a group of students, whereas in informal education, there are no teachers and students. Formal education, both the teachers and students are conscious about the process, but in informal education, neither the teacher nor the student is conscious about the process. Formal education has some prescribed course and fixed timetable, but in informal education there is no prescribed course and fixed timetable. Formal education is imparted in institutions such as schools, colleges and universities, but for informal education there is no fixed place. Formal education has examinations which are held and degrees or certificates are awarded. But in informal education, there is no examination system nor the provision of certificates or degrees. Formal education starts and ends at a particular stage, but informal education continues throughout life. Formal education leads to mental strain on the part of the learner, since he has to make serious efforts to learn. But informal education is natural and it does not cause much strain for the learner. Non-formal education. In non-formal education is a system of education which is given outside the formal system. Non-formal education is mainly for the institutionalized students willing to pursue education. Non-formal education is an alternative system of education. This type of education has flexibility in content, organization, methods, duration, timing, and place of education to suit the different needs of the various people. According to Coombs and Ahmed, non-formal education is an organized, systematic educational activity carried outside the framework of the established formal system. Whether operating separately or an important feature of some broader activity, there is intended to serve identifiable learning and learning objectives. Formal education is meant for a selected few of a definite age group, but non-formal education is intended for all ages and sections of the society. Non-formal education embraces all who aspire to learn. It fulfills different objectives like imparting knowledge, developing different skills, and promoting values among the people. In non-formal education, there is an element of consciousness. Non-formal education is meant for school dropouts, employed or working persons, the housewives, retired person, and many others who are looking for information, knowledge or training without a degree or diploma. Thus, non-formal education basically includes open learning, postal tuition, open university, correspondence courses, seminars, radios, televisions, etc.